25th, 2018, and tonight's broadcast is based on a theory called choice theory. Originally, it was called reality therapy or reality therapy theory, and this was pioneered by William Glasser and much of his work and research and writing. And it's interesting to go back to this theory. This is something that I think early in my career I thought more about. This is an old webinar that we've decided to redo. And as I was visiting it, I had a couple of thoughts. One was actually not related to this theory at all, but one was related to an experience I had recently with a parent. I was discussing something with a parent actually in a group, and the parent shared with me something that I had said many years ago that sounded very arrogant and insensitive to a group of parents as I was doing some of my teaching. And this parent was honest to say that it was offensive at the time, and that times have changed since then for all of us, for me and for this parent. And I really valued that feedback. I remember the experience that was described when they shared this with me. And I thought about that, and I thought, this is something that we all grow together. If I were to look back on my own theories, my own approach, I think about this with my clients all the time. I meet with some of my clients or see some of my clients, or I'm contacted by some of my clients from 15 or 20 years ago. And in some cases, I have an apology to give because I was younger. And I don't think I was completely off base in everything that I did. There was definitely less compassion back then, right? I kind of thought that when you came to therapy as a therapist, that you were just trying to win arguments, that you were trying to be right, that you had information, especially with adolescents, that you were going to give to them and convince them in one way or another to change their life. And of course, going through my own life and getting to where I am today, I realized that what people need in order to heal is compassion and understanding. And that as a therapist, that we gently walk people along at the pace that they're capable of walking. We walk with them, we walk beside them. But in those moments, and that's why I talk about it all the time, in that moment when we come at their defenses with a pickaxe or a sledgehammer, we do them harm. Even though we think that our intent is to help them, to get rid of their defenses, to get rid of their symptoms, we in fact tend to trigger a more fortified defense. So I was thinking about that in this context because I was going back over and refreshing my education about choice theory. I saw the limitations of one theory trying to explain everything of human phenomena, right? And how theorists, when they invent a theory, they get such tunnel vision, right? It's probably what's required of somebody when they start a theory, that kind of commitment to one way of thinking. And in my experience as a therapist, not only have I evolved, but I've become more flexible in my process. Finding really these theories are metaphors for understanding human beings. And so being flexible in my use of metaphors and finding out which metaphor might work best for the client. And lastly, and I'll say this last before I get into tonight's choice theory broadcast, also knowing that other perspectives have something to offer, right? The old question of nature versus nurture, for example. And we learned this early on in our undergrad, that it's almost in all cases never one of those two. That we look at the contribution to both, and it's a both, it's an and situation. So with that preamble to tonight, I'll share with you choice theory and some ideas that it has to offer about the human condition, the issue of mental health, and the issue of addiction and families. So, to begin, choice theory posits that behavior is central to our existence, and it's driven by 5 genetically programmed needs. Survival, and that makes sense. And I won't spend a lot of time on that tonight. Making sure that you have food and shelter, personal safety, and so forth. That's an obvious need that if we didn't have, we would not survive as a species, and we would not survive long enough to pass on our genes to the next generation. And then something that is really fundamental to our hearts, to that sense inside that gives us a sense of well-being, to belong. the connection, love. And we even know from some studies that people with an absence of this connection and love fail to thrive at all, sometimes to the extent that they become sick and die if they don't have that connection. We all know about stories. In fact, right now, I'm wondering about President Bush as he's in the hospital shortly after his wife's funeral. I'm wondering if that story that we so often hear about a long life with a spouse, finally ending with one of them dying and the other one shortly follows, because I wonder if there's this broken heart that is there. It also fuels this drive for connection. It also fuels our behavior, because if we act in such a way to alienate others or to be rejected by others, we threaten this drive, this need. And so that's going to shape a lot of our behavior. Power and significance, that has a negative connotation. He didn't necessarily talk about it in that way, but it's this drive to just be important. A lot of times I see children in our programs, and my own children, people will ask questions. Why did they do something cruel or unkind or triggering or sarcastic or defiant? And part of it is they just need to feel powerful, right? If you can affect somebody, I've seen kids hurt animals, right? I've seen people hunt, which is a much more socially acceptable practice. And there's this sense of power, right? Like I can, in those cases, hurt somebody or something, end the life of an animal. So it's this drive. And like all of these things, there are mutations, and I'll talk about those tonight. Freedom and autonomy, it's one of the things that's flourishing in adolescence and young adulthood, right? This sense of independence. And in my work, when I'm talking to parents, it's very important, because when we saddle our children with our self-esteem, when we look at them as an extension of us, when we measure our worth or goodness as a parent by how they're doing what they accomplish, there is at times this pressure for them to individuate, to push away. And so we see these ways that they go off track sometimes as a way to individuate from parents and to feel autonomous from the parent. And that's important, because the old phrase of cutting off your nose to spite your face, this is what that's about. And then fun and learning. Sometimes these things they're easier to ignore. They're easier to put on the back burner. They're not as pressing as some of the other needs. But to have a full and healthy, balanced life, Glasser argued that somebody's going to find fulfillment in that and all the rest of the areas. So the 10 axioms of choice theory. The only behavior that we can control is our own. There's this existential foundation, right? Existentialism is this idea that it is not the facts in life, not the facticity in life that determines our happiness, but how we respond to it. That's the basics of existentialism. And number two, all we can give another person is information. I love this idea, because it is akin to the idea in Al-Anon that you cannot control another person, right? It's akin to my work as a supervisor of therapists, that you can't control your frustration about a client not acting a certain way, not doing a certain thing, not progressing in a certain way. That's about you. That's a you problem. That's not a them problem. All you can do is provide them with information, or I might even argue an experience. All long-lasting psychological problems are relationship problems. He really saw the significance of relationships. This is one of those ideas where he becomes very focused, or maybe even myopic, that everything is a relationship problem. In other words, if you don't have problems in your relationships, you don't have problems. It reminds me of a funny thing that clients and students have said to me over the years. They would say to me, and some of you may have heard this, I haven't said it in quite some time, but I have said it. They would say to me, well, I get along with my friends just fine. It's just my family that I don't get along with. And I often chuckled and said, that's really the only measure of our mental health. If you can't get along with your friends, you're kind of crazy, right? Because friends, you can leave. You can go away. You can select new ones, right? If there's too much conflict, they can just not be in your life. Or you just go home at night, right? It's like when you're a little kid and you're having sleepovers and you spend all day with your best friend. After 8, 10 hours of being with your best friend, you kind of get on each other's nerves, right? That's what family is like. So it really is the fundamental measure of our mental health, and I think that's akin to his idea here. The problem relationship is always part of our present life. One of his, what I believe, greatest weaknesses was, or is in this theory, is that he put so little value on our past. And I just know that to not be true, that our past affects us. And we have that from a host of theories today. Trauma affects the brain, attachment affects the brain, family history affects who we think of ourselves, how we think of ourselves, who we think we are, and how we relate to other people. But he was very here and now focused, did not like to, thought it negative and a waste of time to look back to old problems. Number 5, what happened in the past has everything to do with who we are today, but we can only satisfy our basic needs right now and plan to continue satisfying them in the future. So again, there was this dismissal of the past, not worthy of exploration or any attention at all for the most part in a therapeutic context. We can only satisfy our needs, number 6, by satisfying the pictures of our quality world in our Carl. And this was this very similar, synonymous to Carl Jung's idea of archetypes, right? The ideals in life, the ideal beauty, the ideal connection, right? All of these archetypes that we measure ourselves against. This is what the quality world was. All we do is behave. Now, he wasn't like the behaviors like B.F. Skinner and Watson, because he said that behavior, total behavior as he called it, is made up of 4 components: acting, thinking, feeling, and physiology. Whereas the pure behaviorists in the early days said that this thing called a brain is a black box. We don't know what happens and it's not important to study. Whereas he talked about these things. He said the former 2, acting and thinking, are the things that we have more control over. And then feeling and physiology are things we have less control over. And we can work to become more and more conscious and directive of those. But we have less conscious capacity to direct those behaviors. All total behavior is chosen, but we only have direct control over the acting and thinking components, what I just said. We can only control our feeling and physiology indirectly through how we choose to act and think. And lastly, the last of the 10 axioms, all total behavior is designated by verbs and named by the part that is most recognizable, right? It's an action thing. It's a very pragmatic, practical action, not a lot of value on insight or depth or history. It sounds much more like a problem solving. Again, some of the concepts here can be very beneficial for adolescents and young adults because they think about their challenges as problems to be solved, right? Like a problem-solving equation. I'm having a problem with the relationship with my girlfriend or with my boyfriend or with my parents or at school. What are the skills, the tools, the steps that I can go about to affect healthy change and get unstuck? Glasser's idea was this, and I think this is something that many of us and most theories believe to be true to some extent. Choice theory, he said, posits most mental illness. He said most mental illness is in fact an expression of unhappiness. And so it would be an oversimplification to say and to disregard the biology of things, right? That would be an oversimplification. But it is really what we have control over. I get asked all the time, could this be genetic? Could this be related to the organicity of the brain? And my answer is absolutely, and we should be compassionate and look at that and take advantage of whatever medical, biological tools and interventions that we have. That's true. And day to day, the thing that we have the most control over is our environment, right? Meaning us as part of the environment. What can we do differently? And what kind of impact might that have on our relationships and specifically with our children? So this idea becomes apparent, I think, to most therapists because for the most part, when you trace back a child's diagnosis and symptoms, you do trace it back to some level of unhappiness, some sadness. It's the same thing that Carl Jung said, when he said neuroses is a substitute form of legitimate suffering, right? Neuroses, in his way of thinking, is the expression of neuroses, some kind of psychological break, fixation, difficulty, dilemma. And again, what I want to say is theoreticians like Glasser are absolute, right? It's a binary world for them. You're either for them or you're against them. And so in that way, I wouldn't lend my faith in this, but it has some value and some interesting concepts. One other thing that the reason I like to touch on other theories sometimes during these broadcasts, because it's like, some of you may have, you may know another language. You may have taught a second language. And what I've heard from people who have taught another language, or even English, if English is their first language, to people in other countries, is they say they learn so much more about English by teaching Spanish or German or Chinese. They learn so much more about English than they ever learned from English class, because you have to think about it. I think the same is true as we study other theories. That's another reason why I do this. So speaking of those categories of needs that Glasser says drive us, power and control is connected to self-esteem, right? Can I can I make a difference in this universe? Do I even matter? Do I show up in the universe? It's related to internal locus of control and self-efficacy, excuse me. Internal locus of control is what I do makes the biggest difference, not what happens to me. That existential idea. I can encroach on others. It can create conflict. The examples that I gave, when people tease people, I remember asking my children when they were young and they would be teasing somebody or teasing their brother or their sister, and I'd say, does it make you feel powerful? And I think I've told the story that I asked my son this one time, and he said, yes, it does make me feel more powerful to pick on somebody. And this is what he's talking about. We think about it in terms of responding to these things with logical and natural consequences, not from a heavily emotionally charged place, a shaming place, but rather a practical place. That's the way Glasser thinks of it. It requires flexibility. We have to have response flexibility when we're dealing with this need and it going awry. There are mutations. I've already talked about some of these. The mutations in this is violence, manipulation, learned helplessness. These are when this need is not met, the person feels incapable, the person feels powerless, and then they start to act out. And we see that in the world with a lot of the acts of terror, right? Especially those that are domestic, where somebody says, I was wronged by girls, or I see in people that I'm hurting, those who have rejected me, those who have dismissed me, those who treated me as if I was invisible. That's that mutation of that need. The need for belonging, right? We have a need for empathy. We have a fundamental need to be understood, that we seek for, that drives us. And we're always looking for a place. I think I've talked about this before. It's been some time, maybe years since I've said this. But when a child has a peer group that the parents find, for reasonable reasons, for logical reasons, they find it objectionable, right? They find it less than. I think it's really important to spend a lot of time in the place where we understand what that peer group, that negative crowd, those negative influences, what that does do for the child, and to validate that a lot. But our first instinct, like with a lot of things in parenting, is to go in the opposite direction, to dismiss, to degrade well, they only are your friend because you do drugs together. And if you weren't doing drugs, they wouldn't be your friend. And on and on and on. And what I have found in my life is that I have friends that I golf with. I have friends that I work with. I have some friends that are my inner circle and that I'm very close to. And I have friends that in some contexts, right, if we stopped golfing, if I stopped golfing, we might not hang out as much together. So sometimes I think we can be really critical of that. The peer pressure and taking care of parents' emotions. I talk about this all the time. This idea that the seeds, the wiring of peer pressure are created in the dynamic in many ways when the parent makes the child responsible for their emotions. In other words, I'm scared or upset that you're doing this thing or you're not doing this thing. And therefore, it is your responsibility to do something different so I'm not upset. I'm not scared. I'm not sad. I'm not disappointed. We wire a child's brain to not know where they and others start and stop, to be undifferentiated. Finding balance as a friend and an authority, right? It's like the broadcast that I did a couple of months back on why your child should be your friend, right? And in many ways, there's more parallels between a good, authentic friendship and the parent-child relationship than there are not. And my experience is I had to unlearn in graduate school or unlearn from graduate school a lot of ideas. One of my favorite quotes from a therapist is what's the biggest mistake that most therapists make in the relationship? And the answer is too much distance. So finding a way to be connected and still maintain your own autonomy as a parent, being able to act authentically and make decisions and maintain your boundaries. Group process and positive peer culture. There's a lot in his theory about that aspect and how that can be helpful. We talk about that in the field. I always say that it's ideal that your children at some time are the highest functioning or one of the higher functioning members of the group, and at another time are one of the lower functioning members of the group. That doesn't always happen, but it's kind of nice to see the dynamic play out. Of course, acting out for attention, introjections, which are I swallow your values whole without considering them when they try to be a good. Flight to health is an example of an introjection in a lot of ways. Lost self. Sex can be a substitute for this need for belonging. He talks about this idea that sex is absolutely part of a healthy, intimate relationship between partners. It's a vital and important and valuable part of that. And it can also be a substitution for it. And then, of course, leaving the mainstream. There are times when we have to leave. That's a lot of things that you guys are doing, right? You guys are leaving the assumptions in many ways of your culture, of our society, and considering new ideas that are not as widespread. That's what happens when you get into therapy. That's what happens when you get into recovery. That's what happens when you get into Al-Anon or AA or analysis or psychotherapy for a long period of time. Freedom and autonomy. Helping children understand, and he talked a lot about this choice theory with school-age children. Helping children understand the balance between freedom and responsibility. Children tend to want all the freedom without all the responsibility, and helping them see the connection. Helping them see the connection between freedom and control, acting out and the consequences that come from it. Success with small responsibilities leading to more freedom and trust, of course. Logical consequences. I used to say to the students all the time, my role isn't to play God in your life. My role is to play Isaac Newton. I didn't invent gravity. I'm just kind of explaining how it works. If you yell, if you act out, if you don't watch your tone with the group, these are the kinds of things that tend to happen. So you get to decide. Choices versus outcome. There's two students that kind of highlight from my early years' work. Kenny said, after struggling all the way through, threatening to hurt himself, threatening to run, fighting with his mother through letters, a lot of defiance. You know, he looked like in the early days of his program, metaphorically, that he was in a straitjacket. That's how he looked like he felt by being here. Things tended to open up or opened up throughout the program. And by the end, he told his mother, who chose to take him home at that time, "This is the safest and easiest and freest place I've ever been in my life." And so learning what freedom really is. Freedom is not about lawlessness. Jimmy said, after an assignment that we were processing, after hearing that he was going to be going to a school after our program, Jimmy said, with tears streaming down his face, "You've taken away all of my freedom except for my choices." And I thought it was profound. I said, "Jimmy, say that again slowly." And he looked up at me and he said, "You've taken away all of my freedom except for my choices." Right? So this shift toward understanding what freedom is. Like I said, fun is a drive that Glasser talks about that's easy to ignore. I used to talk about this mutation with clients, that they think that life should be 90% fun and 10% work. As an adult, as you grow up, you realize that it's not that ratio. And that if we try to live in that ratio, that's what gets us into the problem with addictive behaviors, dangerous behaviors, unhealthy pattern behaviors. But that we need to have fun, that it's important. We try to have fun every day. And I love watching the clients and students having fun at silly camp games. It's one of my favorite aspects of the program. You take away all that computer, all that electronic and screen time, and literally they're playing with sticks and rocks sometimes. We do have a need to escape. We can't be all business all the time. And what we have to be wary of course, is those things that are addictive by nature, right? Dangerous by their very essence. Although one can become addicted to things that aren't necessarily addictive, like exercise, right? Or reading. You can become addicted to things that we would not normally associate as negative. But watch out for those things that are. And then really it's about balance. Right? That's the opposite of addiction in a lot of ways, is balance in our lives. Humor versus sarcasm. I've heard many people try to justify sarcasm as a tool for connection. And I think at its core, it is insecure. At its core, it is abusive and assaultive. And again, it's not that I don't use sarcasm. First of all, I'm not perfect. Second of all, I just want to be conscious of it. When we set up our groups sometimes, we talk about being mindful of humor and sarcasm. Learning to trust adults more through the process. Part of that is through the connection. And then, of course, this all relates to substance abuse. Like I said, Glasser's earlier work was called reality therapy. It later morphed into choice theory. In reality therapy, it was a more fundamental version of this. It was everything is here and now. Everything is focused on solutions. History and insight, not important, not valued in this theory. He did talk a lot about the relationship between the adults or the therapists and the clients, and how fundamental that was. That was the glue that really held everything together, which you wouldn't think necessarily with how pragmatic, practical, skill-based he was. He described confrontation as evaluating your behavior. Is it getting you what you need? It's similar to motivational interviewing, right? This idea that confrontation is exploring the inconsistencies in your behavior and what you say you value or want to do. He would confront excuses. I mean, reality therapy, choice theory. The only thing you have control over really is how you respond to this world. And it's in the response to this world where the happiness and the joy is. You're not happy. This is an idea from this theory. You're not happy because of who loves you. You're happy because of who you love. You can't control who loves you, but you can control who you love. So it's an empowering kind of idea in theory. Again, I think it has some limitations because I believe in healthy attachment being perhaps the most important ingredient in the development of a healthy self. It was pragmatic versus moral or ethical. I think that can be very helpful with adolescents and young adults, with everybody for that matter. But they tend to be reactive against what they think to be preaching, or somebody looking down on them, judging them. Looking at total behavior, and in his case, total behavior was the thoughts, feelings, along with the behaviors. Making specific plans. It was very, again, practical, very specific, goal-oriented kind of things. Avoid criticizing the past and historical emphasis, for sure. It was non-judgmental, and it had an existential. One of the things I always find interesting with theories is that they, in some ways, restate theories that have been around, in some cases, for centuries, like existentialism. But they package it in new ways, and this does have a foundation in that age-old philosophy. So the take-home for tonight: find the wisdom in each theory. I think if you can explain phenomenon using 2 or 3 or 4 theories, you understand the phenomenon better. That's why understanding things from an addiction 12-step model, a 7 challenges model, a mental health model, a physiological model, all can be a way to understand and see the more complete picture of what's going on, for example. Finding the common ground, right? Becoming bilingual. I have a lot of therapists that are very married to a specific model that they love and that they prefer as a way of seeing the world and intervening with their clients. And I think that's fantastic. It gives them a groundedness and a confidence. And it's important to be bilingual because not everybody has that theory. So learn more than one language. The emphasis on choice versus facticity, right? That idea that it's how we respond, that, like I have always said, the worst things in life haven't happened to most of our students and clients. Some, perhaps, but for many of them, that isn't true. And life is about learning how to fish, not catching the big fish, but learning how to fish, learning how to live, learning how to feel. The choice theory was short-term. It has a nice place in short-term therapies when you can't be in therapy for 15, 16, 20 years. It has an empathic lens for us, non-judgmental lens. No one theory is capable of explaining all human phenomenon adequately, is my belief, but it is interesting to find the way very bright people approach the dilemmas of mental health and addiction. This one tended to neglect, like I said, trauma and brain science. And for me, it's the similar kind of thing, both for a parent and for a therapist. Find a metaphor. Find some ideas, some tools, some models that seem to explain or help the child explain their dilemma, right? If therapy is finding the client, finding the child, and helping that child to tell their story so that they make sense, and so that they can ask for what they need from the world, then we have to be flexible in our approach. And so this is just one more to add to it. And I'll be doing several of these over the next couple of months. Happy to take any live questions if there are any that have come in. I will go to upcoming slides and announcements, and then you can add those on the last question and answer. We would like all parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. Go to a variety. I would encourage you to go to one in your area to ask other people if they know any that are good ones. And you'll be surprised to hear that they do have opinions about it. These broadcasts, of course, are available on podcasts. Please share and encourage these. We're getting a lot of good attention from these right now. A lot of people are saying, I have professionals and parents that I've never met, that have never been through the program, that are approaching me and saying it's helping them in their lives and in their practice. So please share these with your friends. If you're on social media, I know some of you have, share these on your social media if you would, as a service. These are, of course, free. The podcasts are. You can also watch them if you're a parent or an alumni of Evoke Therapy programs. You can watch them live, and you can have access to them through our parent portal, so you can see the slides in the video. On the iPhone, it's on the podcast app, and on Android devices, it's on the SoundCloud app. It's also on your computer. at soundcloud.com. Search Evoke Therapy Programs on all the platforms. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy. Search Evoke Therapy Programs on Facebook. If you want to find out about the organization that knows more or that can help you understand where you can become involved in helping people that can't afford therapy, search Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook. Look to our blog, the Evoke Therapy blog, for current content. My book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on paperback from Amazon, also audio and Kindle versions. Right now the warehouse is out, so just go to the paperback option, the new paperback option that's available there in the middle of your screen, and buy it directly from Evoke Therapy Programs for the same cost. Upcoming intensives. The next opening is Finding You, June 6th through 10th. Go to our website for more information. We are putting on the calendar the Finding You 2. That requires you to have attended Finding You number 1. That'll be coming up soon in October. So we're going to choose the October dates. If you want to do a private family intensive, contact our admissions department. If you're a professional listening to this and you want to come to one of our professional, meaning that you work in the therapeutic field and industry, then you can come to our professional growth workshops. The next women's one is May 20th through 22nd. And the next opening for the men's, the May is closed, it's full, is June 10th through 12th. And I'll be facilitating the men's for the foreseeable future. I just finished the New York City Parent Support Group, so I'll update this information. We're going to be in Seattle on May 12th, Denver on May 14th. Like I said, for Seattle and Denver, if you're a family in that area and you have friends, please encourage them to come. We don't have as large of populations in some of these cities, Seattle and Denver included, and so we would invite you to invite your friends if you want them to learn about what we have to offer, what we have to teach. We're happy to take them in. Contact Melanie at evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. The next workshop, April 21st, just passed. The next one will be June 23rd and 24th at Entrada. We would like all current families to go to this multi-family experiential workshop, and parents who go to these rave about these. These are great educational family therapy experiences. You can ask your Evoke therapist if the timing is a good match for a visit to see your child, because you can combine the two. Contact Gail at evoketherapy.com for more information or to RSVP. And pursuit trips are sober fun, adventure therapy, short-term trips all over the world, any kind of activity for young adults or families. Think of sober fun or therapy light with an emphasis on fun. All right, happy to take questions, live questions. First question, how does a therapist evoke a better choice? In motivational interviewing, you talked about the client finding their truth with very little intervention from the therapist except to evoke. It's through reflection and observation. You're really providing an empathic mirror. And so if you came to me and said, oh, I blew it with my husband today, and I would say, tell me the story. And then I would seek to understand you. I'd reflect back that understanding that would come from a compassionate and caring place. And then you would see a part of yourself that you couldn't see because it was covered in a cloud of shame or guilt, something you had learned from your context. That's how you evoke it out. You find it, you reflect it, and the person sees it and they discover the truth that was hidden beneath those barriers of shame and guilt, for example. That's one way. But it's a lot of reflecting, a lot of listening, a lot of hearing. You ask questions. You say, what about this? Could it be this? I have an idea. What if you thought about it this way? But you're not inserting it into them. You're exploring it with them, and you're doing a lot of reflecting and hearing. Next question. We encourage our son not give his therapist permission to talk to us as parents, so he would buy in more and have a sense of privacy. He initially said, I don't care, do whatever you want. But that sounded like disassociating himself. What are your thoughts? I love that idea. You know, I said this to my child's therapist, my 16-year-old's therapist, just a week ago. I said, I don't want to know. In the state of Utah, parents have the rights to the child's file. I don't want that. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to know. If there's something eminently dangerous that I need to be a part of course I do want to know that. But if you're struggling, you need to be in a place where you can talk about your craziness, your struggle, right? Your bad decision making, without the pressure of parents looking over your shoulder and having their anxiety be triggered and then trigger you. So I love, love, love the idea of giving the child a safe place to explore themselves, which includes outside of the eyes of the parent, and trusting the therapist's judgment enough that if something is eminently dangerous, that it'll be addressed effectively. All right. Looks like that's all the questions that have come in. Sorry about the mistake with the misspelling. Looks like a lot of you figured it out. All right, folks. This is one of my favorite things to do. So this Monday, if you have extended family, friends, if there are siblings at home, you can either have them send in questions, or you can submit questions for or about them. So on this Monday, April 30th, I'm going to be talking to siblings, family, and friends about siblings and directly to siblings if they have questions. What do I do if a child doesn't want to write a letter to his or her sibling if they're so angry and hurt? What if they feel like I've done the wrong thing and they're being afraid? They're afraid they're going to get sent away. What does my brother or sister do all day when they're out there? I'm going to be talking to siblings and about siblings, and also family and friends. So please, you can answer a question that they've asked you, a family or a friend, something that you're struggling with to answer, how to respond, and I'll give you my answer, an answer. So yeah, look forward to that. And look forward. I love it when I have siblings join, any age, all the way down. I've had them as young as 8, I believe, all the way up into the mid-20s and even 30. So I welcome those live. If you want to attend it with your child, you're welcome to. If you want to watch it first and then show it to your child later, that's also okay. Looks like one more question is coming in. I have time for one more question. My adult child is in aftercare after leaving Evoke in January. He feels a lot of pressure to do well, get well, because his dad is paying so much for treatment. How to relieve this pressure? Absolutely talk about it. I mean, that's the fundamental kind of shame talking. And really talk about how there's no substitute to talking about it. And if you can, own where you've put that kind of pressure on him, if you have. Acknowledge it. You know, it's an important thing to discuss and rediscuss and rediscuss, because that kind of shame, that kind of pressure does not lend to healthy healing. So I'm glad that you asked the question. It's a great question, and have a discussion. And I hope, I cross my fingers, that the therapist doesn't enlist themselves in that also. I've heard people, therapists in the therapeutic community, use that as guilt and pressure to a child. That's not our experience about what helps children to heal and to feel safe and to look at themselves. We don't do this so that they're obligated. We do this as a gift of love, right? You don't love your child so they'll owe you something back or be obligated to you back. Even gratitude. We give it. In family therapy, they talk about a gift being something that you give without strings attached. And if you can't, you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. But if you do, ideally, optimally, you do it without strings attached. I'm his mom. We are divorced. He doesn't talk to him about it. I'll say this. This is a challenge, what you just shared with me. And I'll tell you this. You have a disadvantage when you have co-parents that aren't on the same side. I would encourage him to talk to his father. I would encourage the therapist to encourage him to talk to his father. I would tell him how ineffective it is for you to hear about that, because it's not about you. You wish you could help, but you really can't. And I'll say this, because this came up in New Jersey last night when I was speaking to a group of parents. The research shows us that if one parent is a stable, grounded, connected force in a child's life, it makes a difference. They just need one person in their life that is that grounded, reliable, stable person that can see them. So if you do your work, and you cannot make up for your ex-husband, you can't sit in his place, but you do your work, you stay present with that, and encourage your son. I would even say I can't do anything about that. You're going to have to figure that out. Even if he writes a letter that he doesn't send, that could be an exercise that his therapist does. Also, hand that to the therapist that he's working with so that it's not yours, because it'll do nothing but cause you to go crazy, because you can't solve it, but you can be there for him, and you can be stable and consistent, and it makes a difference, even if his father isn't. And I'm not saying his father isn't, but even if he isn't. All right, folks, I look forward to talking to you Monday. Please invite family and friends. Bring on siblings. Bring questions. Send questions in advance to webinar@evoketherapy.com to us, and we'll be happy to upload those on the slides before we start. Look forward to that. Monday, April 30th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Have a great week, great weekend, and I'll talk to you Monday. Bye-bye.